This is Betty Brown. So, Betty, where were you born?
I was born in a little town in the southwestern tip of North Carolina, Murphy, North Carolina. It was a small town. I loved growing up there. We lived across the street from the schoolhouse. We lived 1 block from our Presbyterian church that we attended. My brothers and I walked everywhere we went, as did all the children at that time. And everybody in town knew us and the other children, so they all looked out for us, so we always felt very safe. I loved my school. I enjoyed my classmates, and it was a very nice, very safe place to grow up.
Describe the house you grew up in. Like, was it small or big? Or?
It was probably an average house. My dad worked for his dad, who was a Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth dealer. So
Okay.
Daddy was a salesman for him, and my mother never worked. She was very active in church and civic affairs, did lots in the community. So we had an 8-room house with 2.5 baths, so had a nice yard. We had a large mimosa tree in the front yard that had limbs just made for sitting, and I loved to read, and we were up a little bit above the highway. So I would sit in that tree and read and watch the traffic go by. That was my favorite pastime.
Have you lived anywhere besides Murphy and Lenoir?
Yes, I lived in Murphy until I grew up and met and married my husband, Bud Brown. And from there, he was in the Army Infantry. So I moved to Fort McPherson, Georgia. And we lived there. We had our first child, Debbie, and when she was 6 months old, he received orders to go to Augsburg, Germany. And we were in Augsburg for 3 months, and they transferred him to Ulm, which is ULM, and we were there several years. And while there, we traveled to Italy and Austria, and then we came back to Colorado. Then we moved to Nebraska, where our son Larry was born. Mm-hmm. From there, we moved to Fort Riley, Kansas for a year while Bud trained military to go to Korea. And when he took the troops to Korea, I moved back to Murphy for 18 months while he was in Korea. Then we moved to Hickory, and he was advisor to the National Guard for 4 years. Then we moved to Lenoir, and we've been here for 46 years.
Wow. So what was it like when your husband was away and you were just kind of alone?
It was lonely. Fortunately, I lived just across the street from my mom and dad, and they helped so much. And one brother that time was going to Western Carolina working on his master's and working as a principal at one of the schools. And he would come and stay with me through the week, and then on Friday and Saturday nights, Debbie and Larry and I would go to my mom and dad's and spend the weekend. So it was very nice to have my parents there, and I had a grandparent there and my brother.
Did you guys have any family traditions that you would do?
I guess Christmas was the main one, because when both my sets of grandparents were living when I was growing up, and we would get up on Christmas morning and have Santa Claus at our home. Then we would go to my dad's parents and have Christmas dinner, go back home for 2 hours, then go to my mom's parents for Christmas evening and a meal and open gifts. So all we did was eat and went home exhausted on Christmas night. And we went to church on Christmas Eve. Santa Claus always came after the communion service, so the children all received candy and oranges and a little gift of some kind in the fellowship hall. So that was always a treat for us. Okay. We always took nice vacations in the summertime.
What was your favorite part of growing up? Just any part.
I felt like I had a very good childhood. I always felt loved. I guess one of my favorite parts, well, I loved school. I was in the band from 6th grade on through 12th. In high school, I was always on the annual staff. I was on the newspaper staff. I just loved doing the extracurricular things, and I enjoyed all my classes. So I think I just loved being at school and studying and doing. And I loved reading. I used to get into trouble at home because I would rather read as to do my chores.
If you could pick one childhood memory that's just your all-time favorite, what would it be?
I think my all-time favorite probably was times with my Sunday school teacher. Her name was Miss Jack. We called her that, and she, being in a small church, she went, kind of went up with us as we went up. But I can remember how I loved learning the catechism, the shorter and the longer catechism, and couldn't wait to get to Sunday school on Sunday mornings to recite what I was supposed to learn and get my gold stars. And I loved Miss Jack, and I really attribute so much of my faith, my beginning faith, to her teachings.
So you spend a lot of time here at the church helping.
Yes.
Did that rub off from your mother helping?
I think it did, because I always wanted to grow up to be like my mother. She was so helpful, and she was such a wonderful Christian witness. When people were ill in the hospital, Mama would go and sit with them. She was a nurse. And I said she never worked. She did in later years after we were all grown and gone. And her preference was the elderly and the babies. And if the hospital had a very sick infant, the doctors always asked for my mother. But she was such a wonderful Christian witness and did so much, and I always wanted to be like she was.
Have you had a favorite job that you just really liked going to?
Well, I worked as a teacher assistant at East Harper for 10 years and then at Davenport for 12 years. I loved every minute. People used to say, "Don't you get bored doing the same thing every day?" And I would say, no 2 days are ever the same. When you work with children, you don't ever have 2 days alike. And I loved the teacher I worked with. I loved the floor, all the faculty members I worked with. We were like one big happy family. And in my 22 years, I loved every minute of it.
What did you do?
I was teacher assistant, but I was fortunate enough to work with a teacher who allowed me to do everything I wanted to do. She could say, "Betty, I would like to do this tomorrow," and I'd say, "I've already set up the planning for it." Or she'd say, "Next week I want this on the bulletin board," and I'd say, "I'm already working on it." So we had worked together for so long, we thought so much alike. And we just worked hand in hand, and she allowed me to do as much teaching as I wanted to do. And our principal would always introduce Becky and me as two of my best teachers. So I was really pleased with that.
Do you still keep in touch with her?
I do, yes.
Okay, that's good.
We are still good friends.
Who was in your household when you were growing up?
My mom and dad, and I had two brothers. I was the oldest, and my brother next to me was born 18 months after I was, and then the other one was born, I guess, a couple of years later. The three of us were born in 4 years, so my mom said she felt like she had triplets.
What was the name of the church that you went to?
It was First Presbyterian Church in Murphy.
What was your favorite age, like elementary school, college?
I'd say probably high school was my favorite age.
Is there a reason why?
I think because of all the extracurricular things I was allowed to do. I appreciated the staff members, the teachers, allowing me to be involved in those things. We also had plays. I was always in plays, because I could memorize very easily.
Like the catechism?
Yes. And back then we had Bible in school every week. Every Tuesday morning we had Bible, and I loved that. But we had to memorize long poems, and then we had to get up in the auditorium and recite the poems in front of all the other students. And it was just so easy for me to memorize. I would hate to think I had to do that today, but back then it was very easy.
That would have been nerve-wracking for me to just stand up in front of everyone.
Yeah, I would rather work behind the scenes now.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Caldwell Community College. I got 2 years there. I did not go anywhere else.
Okay. Why didn't you go anywhere else?
Well, I graduated from high school and met Bud, and we just fell in love, I guess, sort of at first sight. We dated 6 months and married. So he was working and going to school. So it took him, he was taking correspondence courses, and when we were overseas, then in Colorado, he attended the University of Colorado. When we went to Nebraska, he attended Creighton University. And in Kansas, he didn't have time to go. So when we moved to Hickory, he went to Lenoir-Rhyne. So he finally finished all of that. So I was at home with the children, and then when he finished all that, then I started taking all the early childhood classes out at the community college.
Okay. What was his major?
Business administration.
Do you have any family heirlooms or keepsakes that you just want to keep forever?
I've got pieces of silver bowls and pitchers that were my mom's. Well, they were actually her mom's, so they came from my grandmother. And then I have some pieces of jewelry that came from my mom's family and my dad's family. And some old pictures of, great-grandparents and great-aunts and uncles, the black and whites that you wouldn't take anything for because they're just priceless.
Did you have a favorite book when you were growing up?
I think the Bobbsey Twins series. I love those, and Little Women. Let's see, what were the others in the Little Women? But I guess I read Little Women probably 20 times. And I loved all the Bobbsey twin books. And as I grew older, I think Gone with the Wind was one of my favorites. I don't know how many times I read it.
Was there a favorite out of those three Bobbsey twins?
Probably Little Women would be one of the favorites. And Pollyanna. I loved Pollyanna.
Is there a favorite story that, like, your parents would tell you when you were growing up, like a bedtime story?
You know, I really can't remember. Can't remember that. I know we would always have prayers and Bible readings at night. And you know, when I was younger, we didn't have TV at that time. My parents bought the first TV that came into Murphy. And before that, we would listen to the radio, and I can remember Daddy sitting reading the newspaper at night, and Mom would be doing something, but we would always turn the radio off and have our Bible story and our readings, and then have our prayers. And then my brothers and I could go to bed and read or study, whatever we needed to do.
Do you have, like, a favorite story from when you were a baby that your parents told you when you were older?
Oh, I have one. It's not a very good one. My mother said I had a terrible temper when I was a baby, and I would get so upset about things. I would go to a corner wall and just kind of beat my head against the wall because I was so upset. And she said, fortunately, I had very thick curly hair, but she said I did have a terrible temper. I remember them telling me that on more than one occasion.
Yeah. What is the strangest major event that you've lived through? Like, have you gone to see the Brown Mountain Lights? Or?
Yes, we did many years ago. Jane Carswell was the one that invited us to go up there, and a whole group of us from this church took a picnic supper, and we went up there, I guess, maybe a half a dozen times in the spring and summer, and would sit there for hours until it was really, really dark. And a couple of times we thought we saw lights along, but most of the time we didn't. But that was very strange.
Yeah. Any other weird things that you saw or heard?
Don't recall any.
Okay. Is there any one person that you think you've changed the most?
I don't know. I guess Bud and I feel like we have changed each other. He came from a good Christian family, too, and I feel like we probably have reinforced each other's Christian beliefs, because from the time we met, we both knew we didn't want to marry anyone that drank or was not a Christian. Those were just the two things we said. Mm-hmm. And when we married, we both said, we're not going to divorce, because I never believed in divorce. And we said, we're not having our children grow up with two separate parents. And so those were things that we just always firmly believed in. So I feel like he has helped me in my faith, and I have helped him.
Did you ever have any pets?
Oh, yes, we always had dogs. And we lived our home backed on the woods. There were lots of wooded areas around Murphy. And so we were always finding hurt squirrels or rabbits or birds. You know, a tree limb would fall and maybe a bird's nest in it, and we'd find little baby birds, and we would take them home and try to nurse them and feed them with eye droppers. And Mom and Daddy would always say, it won't work, that they're wild. If you handle them, they won't live. And they didn't, but we kept trying. And we were always taking care of even lizards. We found lizards that were hurt, and we would have funerals for all those animals when they died. We always had funerals.
Did you name any of the pets?
We named them. Our dog that we had for so many years was named Blackie. He was part cocker and part I don't know what else. But she had 4 litters of puppies, 9 puppies each time. So she had 36 puppies in all her lifetime. And she lived to be very old. But when she would have those puppies, she would take care of like 6, and the other 3 she wouldn't let eat or anything. So we would always try to take those other 3, and usually we managed to keep them alive with eye droppers of milk or baby bottles or something. But they looked like little tiny rats. They were so ugly when they were newborns. But it amazed me that she'd take such good care of 6 at a time, but not the other 3.
Any other names of dogs?
Blackie's the only one I can really remember, because we had her for so many years.
Do you know how many years? Or
let's see, I think she was almost 15 years old when she finally died. And I have a nice story about her. My youngest brother was down at the mailbox playing one day, and Mama kept hearing Blackie barking. And she knew Tommy was there playing, and back in those days you could let a child play. The mailbox was as far as from here to that door, and you would let a little child play and not worry about it.
So 30 or 40 feet.
Yes, and but Blackie just barked continuously. So finally my mother decided she'd better go down there and check, because it was kind of down the hill. When she went down there, Tommy was playing with his little cars, just going round and round, and there was a big snake over here, and Blackie was making a continuous circle around my little brother to keep that snake away. And that's why Blackie had barked constantly, probably for about 15 minutes.
Wow.
But I just always remembered that, because I never liked snakes anyway. Even little green garter snakes just scare me to death.
Did your little brother have any idea?
He never even looked up. He just ignored Blackie's barking and just went right on playing with his cars.
How old was he?
He was probably about 7 or 8.
Is there a favorite or most important picture that you have?
I think one of my most important is one of Bud in his uniform when I first met him, because he was so handsome, and I have always loved that picture. And of course, I think one that we had made some years ago in our church directory, that one was such a good one of both of us that I really treasure that.
Did you have a family reunion anytime, or no?
It's been, we have a family reunion on my mother's side every June, July, or August. And it gets smaller each year. It's gotten to where it's just cousins, because all the aunts and uncles and the grandparents are gone. And then it's been about 5 years since Bud's family had a reunion. And that one's getting smaller too.
What were some fads that happened when you were little?
Oh, one fad was the poodle skirt. I don't guess you remember the great big white a skirt out of felt, which was stiff, and then you'd have a big poodle on it, and the penny loafers or the saddle Oxfords. You probably don't remember any of those things, but those were fads when I was in high school. And if you didn't wear that poodle skirt every so often, you weren't very important. And you had to wear your penny loafers or your saddle Oxfords.
Huh. Looking back, do you think those were kind of strange that they were so popular? Or...
No, when I see some of the fads today, I think, those, because we didn't have the real short skirts. They were long skirts, and we weren't allowed to wear pants to school. No girl would have ever worn jeans to school.
Like some of the fads today last a couple months, and then we just look back and say, why were those popular? What is one thing that you want to do more than anything else? Just one trip, one visit or something?
Well, Bud and I had planned a trip to Russia about 6 or 7 years ago, and then our granddaughter came to live with us through some problems she was having, so we postponed the trip. We've planned it different times since, and of course now we have Brennan, our little great-grandson, living with us. So probably that trip will not ever be, but we need to take care of Brennan, so that comes first. I think the main thing I would like to do is to be of more service to people and more service to God, because I don't feel like I'm doing enough. And since we've had Brennan, I've had to spend more time with him, which eliminates time for visiting in the nursing homes and visiting people that are sick. I still try to keep up with phone calls to people and cards, and if someone is sick, I try to take food, but I don't feel like I'm doing nearly what I need to do. So I'm hoping that God will eventually give me opportunities to do those things as Brennan gets to school and we have a little more time, but our priority is taking care of him right now.
What was your favorite subject in school?
Language arts.
You just liked reading the books?
I loved reading. I enjoyed the English. I loved the writing. We did lots of creative writing. We had lots of essays and term papers to do. And I always enjoyed the research that went with all of that. Math was the only one I didn't really care for. I really struggled with math, but all the other subjects came so easily. I said I would have gone to school forever if I hadn't had to do math.
Is there a reason why you just didn't think math was fun or
I don't know. My dad was he felt more like an engineer, and mathematically he could just do anything. And my brothers are both very good at math. One was a teacher and one was an electrical engineer. But I just did not get the math genes. But I enjoyed everything else.
Where have you traveled to in the world?
Okay, other than the places we've lived, we've traveled to Canada and Nova Scotia. We've traveled in a lot of the United States. We went to Seattle and from there into Victoria. And then when Bud was traveling for Bernhardt, I went to Thailand and China with him. And then one time when he was coming back from Asia, I met him in England and we spent time there. Then later we took a trip to Scotland, and I've been to Argentina with him. I've been to Mexico. So we've traveled quite a bit in the United States and out in our married life.
That sounds like a lot of traveling.
And we loved every minute of it. It was just a lot of fun. And when we travel, we don't travel or take vacations to rest. We travel to sightsee, go to museums and art shows, and just whatever we can see culturally, we think, we can rest when we get home. We're here to see what we might never get to see again.
Do you have a favorite specific trip that you went on?
I think the trip to Canada when we went to Victoria and then came all the way over to Lake Louise. That was, it was a very long trip. I think it was about 900 miles. That was one of my favorites.
Did you see Niagara Falls?
Yes. We have been to Niagara Falls and then went into Montreal.
Is there like a product out today that you just think is so crazy, like advanced or something like that?
I can't think of anything like that. There are so many products, just
so much stuff.
So much stuff, that's right. It just boggles your mind to try to think and keep up.
What other churches have you gone to? Like anything besides Presbyterian churches?
Yes. When I was growing up, our church was small, so we didn't have many young people. So I attended First Baptist Church on Sunday evening because most of my friends were there. And then when Bud was in the military, if we lived on post, we would attend the on post chapels, which was Protestant. And then when we were living other places, we attended a Methodist church sometimes because Bud grew up a Methodist. And then, but most times we would be fairly close to a Presbyterian church, and so we would always go to the Presbyterian church.
What time period would you go back to live in? Like the 80s or the 1600s?
No, I think probably the 50s, because the 60s were when your hippies started coming in and all, and the schools began to change, and I think that was the period of time when, maybe the late 50s, when people decided that babies should do and children should do what they want, that the parents shouldn't be in charge.
Yeah, it's kind of gone a bit downhill.
It has, yes.
Yeah. Would you change any part of your childhood, just any one thing, or was it all good?
I don't think so. I think I was very blessed to have the childhood that I had.
Do you think how your mom and dad taught you has affected how you've taught your children and grandchildren?
Yes. The one thing with my parents, I always knew I was loved, but back then I grew up, children should be seen and not heard. So when I went to my dad's parents, my brothers and I had to sit on one step at the edge of the living room, because if we went anywhere else we might mess up the floors. When we went to my mom's parents, we could just be at home, and she always wanted to know what we wanted to eat. But Mom and Daddy weren't ones to say, I love you, but we knew we were loved. And I think I've learned, as Bud and I married and had children and grandchildren and a great-grandchild, it's very important to say, we love you, and give them lots of pats and hugs.
What was your favorite movie, like, of all time?
I think Gone with the Wind. I bet I saw that 15 times.
Is there, like, a reason you saw it 15 times, just to go back and see it just because you loved it so much?
I just loved it. Today, honestly, I can't tell you why I did that, but as I was growing up, I guess I romanticized it so much. And you know, Clark Gable was just so handsome, and I guess all the girls my age just fell in love with him. Now, as I was older and Elvis Presley came along, I didn't care a thing about him.
Were there any games you would play when you were little that people still play now?
Probably not. Probably the games we played were too tame. Now, my brothers and I would get out in the yard and play a touch football. And I was never very good at sports, at outdoor sports. Now, we would play card games. They were, I don't know that those card games are, we had one, I think it was called Authors, where you had all these cards about famous authors. And that was an educational game as well as interesting. And we played bingo, and we played Scrabble and checkers.
Would you ever, like, pretend to be someone in a book that you read or maybe something?
Oh, yes. I had a great imagination when I was growing up, and I was always pretending I was another character. I love to be Pollyanna because I always wanted to pretend that I was perfect and I did everything just right. It never worked out that way, but I enjoyed pretending.
What has changed the most from when you were growing up to now? Like the way people are treated or anything?
That, yes, I think the way people are treated, there's not as much respect today as there was. We were always taught to respect your elders, and I really worked on that with our children, and I'm working on that with Brennan to be very respectful of other people, not just elders, but his peers. And I don't see that disrespect in our church with young people, but I see it out.
Anything else?
Well, I think money. I think we valued money more when I was growing up because we had to earn our allowance, and we weren't allowed to just go and buy things every week. And I feel like today lots of children and young people
just don't know the value.
They don't know the value, and we're trying to teach Brennan the value of money.
Okay. I think that wraps it up. Thanks for your time.
Well, you want to